Well, welcome to Montreal Rocks. Really happy to have you join us today. Uh, there's I want to talk about the new EP, of course, and I want to talk about going back to a trio. Uh, but first, I kind of want to go a little bit back in time.
Mhm.
There's always a time in our life that, and it's usually when we're a child, where music takes on a new meaning. It goes from something we hear to more something we feel. And I want you to take us back to your childhood, and you're maybe flipping through your parents' collection, and you see something or you hear something that unlocks that passion for music. Is there a band or a moment where that happened for you?
Um, I remember my dad playing me to sleep, playing guitar and singing folk songs because he was a folk singer in bars in and around Ottawa in like the 70s. So he would play me to sleep or just play for fun all the time. There's always guitars around the house, so that was a big part of it. Um, but I remember loving to dance, like Michael Jackson. I think that was my first CD, and just loving to. As long as it had a good beat, that's all I cared about. Um, and I remember really noticing big choruses. Like I remember Celine Dion had these big choruses, the power of love. When I was a kid, I just noticed like this feeling, or like Toto, that Africa song.
Yeah, which big comeback song
Yeah.
because of Weezer.
And I remember just feeling that song, like it had these drums and this big chorus. And I remember being like, wow, that's powerful. Just noticing this big wave, like big peak and trough of I remember thinking there was something powerful about this sensation of music.
That explains a lot. Just to give you some history, my first introduction to Half Moon Run was waiting in line to go see was the concert that was in on St. Patrick's Street in the field. Anyway, I'll come back to me. Dun, 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 dun. Anyway, they sing a bunch of.
No, I don't know that.
Anyway, I was waiting in line, and you guys were on stage, and we can see on the big screen, and it's like, wow, this is like I'm missing something. I kind of wished I got there earlier. And then, of course, along the years, I've seen you a couple times. Now, you're a Canadian band, and you kind of rose to fame pretty quickly. I mean, it's still a decade, but you kind of made it right up there, even winning a Juno. But fame is this double-edged sword, right? With fame comes people who are attracted to fame, but maybe are not attracted to you. They just want to be around fame. How do you deal with all the attention that you're getting, and how do you stay grounded amid all that?
I'm pretty isolated, actually. I don't I don't socialize very much, and I'm kind of absent. So I don't live it. I don't really go to events unless it's we might get invited to Cirque du Soleil, but I'm not like a network type of person. It's in a way it's kind of easy just to stay. If you don't want to be in the limelight, you don't have to be. I mean, I guess I'm lucky that I don't have like paparazzi following me around. So it's, where it has been weird is when I'm on tour for so long and you don't really have to manage your own schedule or, do dishes or cleaning or anything. Cause you're moving from hotel to bus to venue and you just kind of float through life. Like you're kind of like a kid again and someone's taking care of all of your needs. You never cook, you never clean. You're just kind of floating. And you get home and you're like, well, okay, I got to do dishes. I got to make food. Okay, groceries. Okay, groceries. I haven't done groceries in a year. Okay. And then just getting back into the normal flow of life. It's very bizarre. But then a simple thing like doing menial tasks really connects you to, connects me back.
Mm-hmm.
I recognize like what a privilege that sounds like, but it's funny. Building something with wood, for example, just completing a task with these materials with my own hands, rather than everything being kind of delivered to you. It's creating with your own hands keeps you grounded, I guess is what I'm getting at.
Yeah, it's maybe touring is a little bit like paint by numbers. It's a little too easy. I mean, there's the hardships, but sometimes creating something on a blank canvas, and going back to the basics is the best. And of course, now with this quarantine, you're kind of forced not to tour. So how is that affecting your day to day? Is it putting you in a creative mode, an introspective mode, maybe where you're working on yourself or you're reading more?
Yeah, reading more, building a lot with wood. I was at my cabin basically the whole quarantine. Just didn't. I left every 7 to 10 days, and I was building things and not really writing at all. I mean, but it's important to think like sometimes there's a time for planting and a time for harvesting, and this seems to be a time for planting. So it's like just so as to say, there's not much product being harvested, but there's a lot of observation. The world's changing so much, so quickly, and there's so much powerful movements happening. And I'm kind of observing it all, and then I don't know. Eventually, it works its way into music over time.
That same Bible verse talks about a time for laughing and a time for crying.
Interesting, but that's a biblical verse.
Yeah.
Oh, huh.
I'll have to send you. I don't know it offhand, but yeah, and this kind of goes a lot to how I find this is good. This is going to be a recurring theme in our conversation about these contrasts. Like if I take just the word moon, like there's always a contrast, right? There's always because of the way it rotates around the sun. I mean, around the Earth, we always see the same side. There's always this bright light side, and there's always a dark side. And when it comes to darkness, we all have this darkness within us. Like even there's a quote by Mark Twain that says, "Everyone is a moon and has a dark side which he never shows to anyone." So what to you is that dark side that we don't show to people? Or how do you deal with your dark side? Because we all have one.
I try and give it some light. I think like openness and sharing ultimately is the ultimate ecstasy, and hiding is. I don't think it's the right. I mean, if you look at an animal, for example, that is virtually incapable of hiding that darkness, and they just are what they are, and we're an extension of those animals, and we have these complex like social minds that have found ways to repress feelings and hide things. I don't know if that's a positive evolutionary step, but it does serve for survival. If you need to push something down to get through a process, that's one thing. But I think openness and revealing and honesty with yourself and others is, that's the ultimate salvation.
Well, there's two parts to this, I would think. One, like a chameleon or someone might try to blend in or reflect back what they're getting. So that's one way to survive. But another way, like you said, I think openness and sharing, gratefulness is a great quality. You can't be grateful and afraid at the same time. You can't be grateful and angry at the same time. So just having this gratefulness practice, it takes away a lot of that darkness, because if you can just wake up and write down 3 things you're grateful for, how can you not have a good day? Because you're starting off on such a positive.
That's an interesting point. Yeah, gratefulness kind of replaces or removes the ability to be fearful or angry in that moment. That's interesting. I hadn't thought about it like that. Yeah.
Coffee with Montreal Rocks. We tackle the big subjects. Again, even your last album, A Blemish in the Great Light, talks about light. But I was interested in the fact that you were mentioning to Zach, actually, he just lives down the street from here, how that album started with the 40 rough cuts. You went down to 20, and then finally you released 11 on this album. And now you have this new EP, Seasons of Change. What's the criteria to pick the winners? Like, are they the best ones, or are they more those that fit the mood of the album?
Well, there's so many factors that go into it, but basically the album, we wanted it to fit on a single vinyl. Like, we're not a big fan of those double vinyls, like just functionally, it's annoying as a vinyl listener to have to flip it every 2 or 3 songs.
Yeah.
So I wanted like 2 full sides and that's it. And so that obviously the amount of music you're allowed on a vinyl is limited in that scenario. And so we wanted it to be cohesive, stylistically cohesive. And so in doing that, we kind of discovered that there's this extra, we can't fit these 20 songs on this one vinyl, obviously. So there's kind of this other material that actually seems to be cohesive in and of itself, which is now this EP. Most of this was recorded during the same time as The Blemish and the Great Light. And so, and it seemed to be more folky, more mellow, and wistful. And so we kind of said, hey, you know, that's its own like cohesive package right there.
I definitely feel that. Well, first of all, I'm a big vinyl lover. The interesting thing about Half Moon Run is that the first album I instantly loved, and I have to be honest that A Blemish in the Light and the second album I didn't initially like. It was something that grew on me, but yet it's those albums that I don't instantly like that grow on me that seem to have a deeper impact because I tend to appreciate it without this preconception. And I believe that as a band, you guys take chances. You keep changing and evolving your sound. And I think that you've gotten permission from your fans to just say, okay, I don't know what this is going to sound like, but I trust that it's going to be good. Is that some right now, to me, it's the last album, and this starts off a lot like the 70s vibe.
Mm.
That's why I was kind of curious about what you listened to when you were younger, because I want to see where that came from.
Oh, I mean, I listened to tons of classic rock when I was younger, and you know, it's hard to say. Like, there's thousands of micro influences that make their way in. Whether it's like something you heard on the radio recently from Top 40, or like Sultans of Swing, or some more obscure like 70s soft rock or yacht rock, as they call it, which I've been really into before A Blemish in the Great Light while writing it. But yeah, we don't really go in. All of that stuff is just, it's not by design. It just happens. And so the vetting process when we're recording, we do so many recordings with just a simple 2-track in the room while we're playing the song. And it's very much like chiseling a sculpture. It's not like just following your heart and doing it off the cuff. A lot of artists like go into the studio with a bunch of hired musicians and just create a song with a lyrical idea and just finish it off in one day. But us, it's really chiseling. It's time and time and time again. Sometimes we have, I mean, one song has 105 2-track recordings before we even went into the studio, of just running different arrangement forms and different melody ideas and different vocal and lyrics and instrumentation and all that stuff, until we reduce it to this final version that's just been so tied and tested, and we still enjoy it after all of this time of chiseling away at it. We're not bored by it. We figure it's made the cut. Naturally, if we stop wanting to play it, it doesn't make the album, because, I mean, if we don't like it, who will?
It's true. And the whole 70s period is known as the pivot of change. That's the title of the decade. And I believe that we change as individuals. We grow, we mature. Eventually, us men, we graduate from boys to men eventually. It took me longer than normal, but as a band, you also change. Why do you feel that change is important in creativity, not resting on your laurels? Because every album seems to be a different style, but that's okay. But why is it important to you?
I think complacency, I mean, that's where art dies. If you just like bask in the glory of your achievements, you kind of stop trying. You always need to, I think, to feel like you're, if you're not growing, you're shrinking kind of vibe. If you stop moving, you will die. I mean, there's a lot of artists you can see that their second album kind of didn't go well because it was after the fame, and they stopped having to live in their buddy's basement and a mattress on the floor, and they didn't have the hardship or to inspire this kind of thing. So I mean, change is essential. I think part of art is change, transformation. It's just,
My personal take on the second album is that you have your first life to write your first album, and oftentimes you write it just for a few people, and then all of a sudden, if it becomes big, next thing you know, you're writing the second album for millions of people, and that changes the dynamic. And if you can remember to go back to your roots and to write for only a few people, that's to me is a key. If you try to please everyone, you please no one.
yes, exactly. And there was a lot of industry pressure to do certain things to, you know, and it's hard to do certain things that so that, oh yeah, if you do this, it'll be more successful. If you do this, you know, BBC will want to play you more, and you have to kind of take that with a grain of salt and get back to like, okay, I'm in the bedroom, I'm all alone, and it's just for me, or it's just to play for, you know, what would I want to say to my unborn child at this time or something, you know,
Mm-hmm.
really intimate and try and touch something special and forget about all of that frontal lobe kind of stuff and just get back to something deeper.
Speaking of the writing process, uh, are you more someone who likes to write intellectual versus emotional? Like, what wins in your songwriting? Is it something that's clever or more melodic?
Um, it always pretty much starts, I'll have lines that come up to me and I write them down, and I kind of never have been able to work them in. You know, for me, the writing always starts with gibberish, like starts like that, just wordless. And then I'd have this very difficult task of fitting in words into a melody and a syllable count that I've already established with gibberish, and then I have to fit words into it. It's like a puzzle. And then I have to make it cohesively intelligible. So that's very difficult. And sometimes it's like catching onto this slipstream and just riding it, and all the words just come really quickly. And sometimes it's like chiseling and it takes forever. But I try to forget grammar and all of that stuff and just make it emotionally resonant. And you bend phrases and you make it intelligible, but I don't know, it's both like easily understandable on a first listen, but you can really read into it.
And I think the having people listen to your songs and come up with a completely different narrative is kind of interesting to me, because you write something with something in mind, and yet somebody might come out with something completely different. For example, I'm thinking of the song, where is it? And there's that song that says, "I can't be your man."
Mm-hmm.
And to me, it feels like it's one of those moments where you're enjoying your last moments, but you know it's not going to last. And to me, I just right away thought about Isaac, who's leaving the band.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure it's not about that, but you know, it could mean something like that. You're enjoying the last moments, because I think he's still playing with you, but then he's leaving. So how big of a gap is that for him to leave this quartet?
Well, it's funny you say that. That song would have been written all at once. That was written back in like 2010, before Isaac was even in the band, because we did Dark Eyes, our first record, without Isaac wasn't in the band yet.
Yeah.
And funny, there's it kind of comes a full circle. um, and then no, it's not about him, but that's funny. You know, words come into play and feelings come into play whether you realize it or not. Maybe there's some kind of unconscious connection between those two events that I hadn't realized until speaking to you. Um, but if you're asking about that change, I mean, it's a big change. We're like, you know, we spent our 20s together. It was like 8 years. It's much closer to brotherhood than friendship, you know. Although it does include friendship. And so it's a big change, but I think that, like we said earlier, change is incredibly important for music, and you know, we wish him the best, and he's got his own path that he wants to explore with art, and now we have this new dynamic that we have to explore and figure out how to do.
And I think in the journey, it's important to, we all suffer loss, whether it's loss. I mean, with COVID, people are having a extreme loss, or they're losing parents and grandparents, more specifically. But there's also, you know, we have to acknowledge that, but there's also, opportunities to grow as a person and to kind of explore new things. And I believe that as artists, you guys are able to take this time to really kind of rebuild a little bit and to see what's important, what's reality, where do you want to go from here? What's the next step for Half Moon Run?
We got to circle the wagons and figure out what we're doing. This is a big change for our industry, and with the reports that I'm reading, that it could be 5 years before we either get like mass inoculation or herd immunity, one or the other. Um, you know, we have shows booked, but who knows if they'll happen. So if we look down the pipeline at maybe years of potentially not doing shows, our whole business model will change. The creative model will change.
Mm-hmm.
So I think right now we're going back to the source, and we have this time to go back to the source. And by that, I mean just getting in a room together and receiving what the universe provides for our creative energy. Literally going back and just listening to silence, the three of us, and then letting some notes come out of nowhere. And
that's interesting.
In the very, very beginning, and just see what happens and fall back in love with playing music together. That's kind of where we're at now. And then that will lead the rest of the way. Kind of like back in 2010, that's what we did.
I find that fascinating because we're in a world where social media is bombarding us with constant noise. There's Instagram noise, Facebook noise, news, the news cycle is noise. And people don't appreciate silence. But silence, you can't create something truly original if you don't have silence, because you're not allowing yourself the time to absorb your own thoughts, to let them flourish. Like if you're planting something, you have to give it a bit of time and water it. And I think silence is the water that allows you to grow new ideas. But if you're constantly bombarding with all kinds of media, you can't create. Not something that's going to be original.
No, I agree. And I think it provides a lot of, yeah, like you said, noise, psychological noise too, and distractions. I mean, a lot of these apps and devices are built with this study of captology, which is like keeping people psychologically captive, like imprisoned, captive. It's crazy that there's a study of this, and these apps and these devices are designed to keep you on them for as long as possible. And especially as a creator, the rules change so frequently that if you don't pay attention to the new Instagram or Facebook or Twitter policies, you're going to miss out and be not as efficient as someone who's paying more attention and engaging more. So it's like, boy, that's a slippery slope, and it's really bad for creativity, because we're one step away from just becoming social media content creators rather than musicians, feels like. So it's very important to shut it all out and look at the bigger picture, try and reclaim some of that intellectual space.
We were talking a little bit about shows, and the Pixies were known for the loud, quiet, loud sound, and I think you guys are known for the large, small, large shows. So you have these big shows, you play festivals, you set up, multiple nights in a row at MTELUS, for example, and then you have these secret shows for fans. I've been to two of them, which were great. One was the last one was in Laval on July 10th, just about a year ago. What do you get from the small shows that you don't get from the big ones, and vice versa?
Oh, it depends night to night. It depends on the crowd and everything. But, I find that like in a smaller theater, like 500 people, you can really, when it's a quiet moment, you can really draw out the pauses longer and really emote a lot harder. If you're playing a big outdoor stage, 20,000 people, and it's like 4:00 in the afternoon, and people are just getting out of their tents and they're starting to drink, and it's like they're distracted. The energy level has to go up. They're not going to notice the subtleties as much, because there's too many distractions. So it's more like power punch. But With the theater shows, you can be more, smaller shows, you can be more nuanced. And I'm hoping, my sense is that people observe the subtleties, and that makes for a more emotional performance. But bigger crowds tend to respond more to big moves and big sounds and high energy.
Yeah, well, you've got that in spades. So, especially when you start hitting the big drums and all these big movements, it's perfect for both the. I mean, even in an intimate setting, it still electrifies the crowd. I think it's one of the secrets to your success is that you guys put everything into your performance. You don't hold back. I think that your willingness to take risks with your sound is very brave. And I think, to me, I believe that it's so part of your DNA that's why the success is coming with it. Not so much because of the catchiness, but it's just touching real emotions and just being the real you, and that's what people want. They don't want that fake. Let's do this to impress Instagram, or let's do this to attract the biggest audience. I think you perform just as good in front of 50 than 50,000.
We saw this. We toured with this band a long time ago, Fantagram, and they had, I think it was 2010. We toured with them, and they had this little piece of gear on stage, and they all had to turn knobs on it at one point in the show so that what they could hear would be accurate. And all written was a piece of tape on it. And it said in big letters, "This is the most important show." So every time, every show they go and they turn a knob and they go like, "This is the most important show." It's a reminder that, whether there's 20 people at some showcase or 50,000, it's not, I don't think you should put a proportional effort into more people. There's a lot of power and just to respect your craft, to do the best you can every single time.
I remember hearing stories of bands maybe going to Europe or somewhere where they're breaking into a market. So they're used to playing a big venue, then they go into a smaller venue and there's like one person in the bar. And they just played their heart out because, hey, that one person made it out. They deserve 100% of our effort, not just because there's only one person. I'm going to give 1%. So,
yeah, that's a good attitude.
Like we talked about many things. One thing that I think that you mention often is that a lot of your songs, a lot of the things that you do is about reduction, like a wine reduction sauce. You kind of get down to the essence, like a song that you build. It starts off with like over 100 tracks, and then you kind of reduce it to the point where it's done. Let's reduce the essence of Half Moon Run into one word.
Dynamism. So
Okay.
just responding and reacting to each other, basically.
No, that makes a lot of sense. You're obviously getting a lot of love from the people that are listening to your albums. Just to give you an example, I was having supper just this weekend. I made a playlist with some of the bands that I interviewed, and I put yours preemptively, and somebody listened to it for the first time, and right away they asked me like, "Who is this?" And that to me is dynamism. It's when you're able to attract someone with just a few notes. And in the background, we're having a really deep conversation. We're talking about life. We're talking about real things. And they hear something that's in the background and they go, "I need to know what this is." And now she goes, "Thank you so much for introducing me to Half Moon Run." It's like, well, it's nothing I did. It's like, it's out there. But
That's great to hear.
so that's a real life example of how music can really reach people. And I think that what you guys are doing is great. I wish you a lot of success going forward. And I hope to be able to see you again, either at one of the big shows or one of the secret shows, as I'm still signed up to your fan page.
Great.
But it's great. And I thank you so much for your time. Our time is up because it's almost 10.
All righty. Thank you very much, Randall.
No problem. Any last words?
Be kind to each other. That's it.
Great way to end it. Thank you so much, Devon.
Okay. Bye now.
Cheers.